Hi everyone, welcome to this preview of my very popular Koala pastel tutorial over on Patreon. This lesson is all about really dense, warm and cool fur, and as you'll see in my artwork, I also take you through how to create a realistic tree trunk as well. Like all of my lessons, I either start off with the eyes or the nose first, and that's just because they are the most important areas to get right. So you want to spend the time at the beginning, make sure they're correct before you spend any lengthy time on the fur work. These particular eyes are quite dark, but there are hints of some rich dark brown tone going on and some red based browns as well. So I started off with a layer of my tones like a burnt sienna from Faber-Castell, the burnt sienna from Stabilo as well, which has more red to it, and then a little bit of burnt ochre as well. And you'll just see here I'm working some of the fur base around the eye as well, just to get that started. So we're using some pinks just in the corner of the eye where of course there are some pink hints, and there's also some orange going on under the eye as well. As this is just a preview, it's slightly sped up. Some sections are cut out just to make it a little bit more condensed. Obviously the full length tutorial is a lot longer. Nothing is cut out. It's about 8+ hours long, so it's quite a long one, and I take you through all the tones that I'm using as I use them, why I'm using them, and I talk you through things like the layering process, getting the tones right as well, so color matching. And all of that is with a real-time voiceover as we move along through the tutorial. So everything is explained as you watch me. And I do provide a list of materials up front, the reference image and outline if you need it, and my artwork as well, just so you can check in with what I'm doing whilst you're working as well. So I've added quite a few specks of highlight in there, just with a white, and that's really brought it to light. I also added a tiny bit of blue in with some of my Faber-Castell blues, and that's because blues tend to help eyes to look nice and glassy, so to help them to look nice and realistic you do want to try and pop some blues or purples into the mix. So I'm doing the same on the left eye as well, so just a couple of my rich brown tones. So this is that burnt sienna from Stabilo 670. This contains a lot more red than the burnt sienna from Faber-Castell, which is number 283. So lots of pink in the corner here. This is my Caput Mortem from Faber-Castell. And as the fur is very bright around the eyes, I'm going straight in with my ivory to build up that bright base there. This is one of the blues that I use for the eye. It's the light ultramarine from Faber-Castell 140, and then lots of these Stabilo titanium white 100 to start to pick out some light within the eye. So onto the nose, I'm starting off just by outlining it. As it's a dark nose, I just want to get rid of that white line, which is the outline, and then solidly blocking in the center with my Smink Serious Black, and then giving that a blend before just defining with my dark color. So just pulling back out that outline and just darkening up and thickening up as well, just covering that paper nicely. So lots of purple. This again, like the eyes, it helps areas to look a bit more shiny and a bit more realistic. And then of course we want some pink in the nostrils as well, so I use a couple of pink tones just to build that up and get some dark pink in there, medium pink, and some light pink as well. When you're working your base like this, you don't always need a really fine point. You'll notice with my tutorials I work quite blunt until I get to the hair detail stage, and then I'll give a little bit of a sharpen, but I certainly don't work really fine. I just prefer this more painterly look of a portrait and fur. I don't always like it when the hairs are super thin, super fine, and it does mean that you're kind of doing double the amount of work because the hairs are so thin that you're having to add more and more in to fill the area up. So unless it's a really delicate fine animal, it's fine to work a little bit blunt. These pastel pencils here, like this ultramarine blue light from Stabilo, is a prime example of how blunt I like to work with my details. With these nose details, I like to randomly make, and that starts to give the illusion that the nose is nice and textured. So you don't always need to pull your hair out trying to get every single little detail in and every little mark in. If you just start to place these marks in all over, just in the, well, you want the light tones in the light areas and medium tones in the medium areas, and of course the dark tones in the dark areas, and it's going to start to make sense and it's all going to come together nicely. So the fur of the koala is quite an interesting one because you've got quite a lot of light fur going on, and generally it's, I would say, a light to medium subject, but we want to start off super dark because the fur is so dense and really packed close together. So I've started off with some of my smink black tones, so the Serious Black and the Black D, which is a bit more like a dark sepia tone. It has a bit more warmth to it. And then once I've given that an initial blend, I'm starting to work in some vibrant tones, so some warm browns, and then finally starting to add in a few lighter hints just around the nose and around the cheeks. And then I'm giving all of that another blend, and you'll see here that started to cover the paper a little bit more, started to get some nice values in there, so lots of different warm tones, a few cool tones. I'm also using my pastel pencils to build up the base, as you can see here, just because they are a little bit more precise. So once you've done that initial blending, you can go around corners with your pastel pencils and just add a few more additional tones into the mix as well. Of course, you can still thicken up with your pastel sticks. If you are a little bit sort of clumsy with them, as I used to be, then you can definitely just use it for the initial stages and then start to really lift and define with your pastel pencils. The benefit to soft pastels, once you get used to them, is they cover a lot more ground. They're a lot softer as well, so they blend out really nicely, creating a nice soft base for you, and they often have a lot more vibrancy to them, so perfect when you're trying to pack lots of different colors into the mix. So you'll see now that that base is complete, I'm starting to work my initial layer of hairs in. So with this subject, which does have really dense fur, I'm starting off dark. In general, as a rule with fur, I tend to start off dark anyway. That just makes sure that you've got some nice depth in the fur and you're not lifting too soon, which means your fur will look a lot thinner because you're rushing that process. So I'm just adding another layer of my light tones. I'm always trying to bring it up to the same level that I can see in the photograph before I add any hair details. A lot of people ask me what white I use as my soft pastel because it is so brilliantly white, and it's the white from Smink. I just find compared to the Unison white, it just packs a lot more of a punch when it comes to those highlights. So I would recommend, if you can, get hold of a Smink one. So I'm just starting to build in some more warm hairs. So the tones that you get in at the base stage, try and get them in at the hair detail stage, just to make sure that that tone continues to run through and it's nice and strong. So I'm adding a little bit of pink in as well, just alongside the yellow. We've got lots of this yellow going on, but there's also some fleshy hints to the face, as you can see in the photograph. So it's about getting a good balance, and the fur generally is warm in tone. There are a couple of cooler areas, like the left eye, just, well, on the left of the left eye, we've got a tiny patch of cool fur there. So I'll be using a slightly colder grey tone just to show that contrast between that warmth on the right. So always using my Cretacolor as I build my fur layers up. This tone is so brilliantly dark, and it's just going to make sure that we have plenty of thickness in the fur. It really starts to darken up areas, and it really makes areas stand out, makes it look really striking as well. When I first started with pastels, never used to use acrylic, and I can see such a difference now with my work than I did when I wasn't using my acrylic. It just really makes everything pop out even more. So if you can get hold of one, it's the acrylic black, then I would recommend them. They're charcoal instead of chalk, so they are really fragile, so just be careful not to drop them on the floor if you've got a hard floor, or when you're sharpening them I wouldn't advise using a sharpener. Just use a Stanley knife if you have one, and make sure that blade is really nice and sharp, because the charcoal is really brittle and the wood surrounding it obviously is harder. It's very easy just to slice through that wood a little bit too quickly, a bit too aggressively, and then just lob off the tip of the pastel pencil, which is never good. It always spoils my day when my lead gets chopped off. So just be a little bit more delicate with the colour when you're sharpening it. So I'm just working on the chin here. As you can see, it's nice and pink. So I'm using a few browns to darken it up, my fleshy browns. So the dark flesh from Caran d'Ache, which is number 748. And then I'm using my dark flesh 50% from Caran d'Ache, which is number 746, to add in some light hairs. Making sure to keep building up my vibrancy as well, so adding a few of the warmer reddy brown tones and the orange tones in as well as some of the grey as well. So where it's a little bit cooler here, as I mentioned, I'm just adding some grey in there as well, and just around the eye. So I'm mixing some grey in alongside the yellow tones and the orange tones and those fleshy tones, because the grey's not got any colour to it, so it's perfect just to balance everything out. You don't want too much vibrancy that it looks unnatural. We want the fur to still look really nice and even in terms of its tone. So using a grey can just calm everything down, just pull some of those orange tones down in particular, just to make sure they're not a really glowing orange. After lots and lots of layering with various different tones, you'll see here how much of a difference it's made. I've been able to lift without washing the fur out, and that's because I didn't straight away jump into anything as light as an ivory or a white, which I'm only just using now here with my Chinese white from Caran d'Ache. Instead, I really gradually lifted. So I started off with that dark flesh 50% from Caran d'Ache, started to add some greys in, some warm tones as well, and then it was only really right at the end when I started adding the white hairs in. Even towards the end like this, if there are any gaps, I'm using a ivory tone which has a bit more warmth to it, just to make sure areas have nice colour to them and we're not layering with too much white. I'm also adding plenty of my Crestcolor hairs in even at the end. This just helps to darken up areas a little bit more and just make areas stand out a touch more as well. So it can help those lighter hairs just to stand out. I'm also using it to just pick out the outline as well. Helps him to look a little bit more three-dimensional. So I'll start on the ear in a bit. I'll just let you watch me as I finish adding in these hairs real time. The ear, I'm blocking in the base with my Smink Black as it's nice and dark there. And then I'm going to start to add some browns in as well as some white as well. That's just to start to lift the edges and start to add some structure in. But first I'm just giving the dark tones a blend, pushing them outwards and getting them into the paper nicely. So I've just added a little layer of a warmer light tone, and now I'm going in with my white. So remember, the full tutorial is real time, there's no skipping, so I will take you through everything exactly as it is. This is just a preview, so just to make sure that it's not too lengthy, I'm cutting bits out, I'm just taking you through it quite condensedly. So I've added plenty of brown tones in there. I'm now going in with my crest colour like I did with the face fur, just to build up that depth really nicely. And then finishing off with lots of my white hairs to really lift and make that ear look nice and fuzzy as well, so really wiggling my hand. And then onto the body, it's nice and dark under the chin, so I'm using my Smink Serious Black, and then like I did with the face and the ear, I'm going to start to work in some of my brown tones, some vibrant tones as well, and those medium to light tones to begin to work some structure in, so the medium areas, the dark areas and the light areas. So it's always better with your layers to, instead of going in with one thick solid layer, which probably means you will condense the paper straight away, you want to just go in with a slightly thinner layer. You're not going to cover the paper completely straight away, so just keep building your layers up nice and thin until obviously the paper underneath is covered, but that way you can pack more tones into the mix without condensing the paper too soon. So I'm adding lots of white at the back here where it is brighter, and then starting to work some rough hair details in with a lighter tone. So this is my Natural Earth 18 from Unison, and then giving all of that a blend. So I'll be using my sponge as a good tool, the tip, just to start to create some of that kind of rough hair detailing. And then when it comes to adding the hair actual details like I'm doing here, I've already started to get some kind of rough hair direction in place, which really benefits us because it starts to thicken up the fur almost immediately at the base stage, and then it just makes that fur look even thicker. So you don't have to add quite so many hair details in place. The furs are already nicely textured, so you can just build layers up but not worry about making it look super thick. So lots of that dark flesh, 50%, and some lighter greys as well to get into the mix. This body has lots of pink hints to it, like the face, so that dark flesh 50% is perfect, mixed in with some ivory as well. Some of those tones are lighter ones which have some yellow to them, because obviously we do want a good balance of the yellow tones and the pink tones as well. I'm going to do the same process for the bottom half of the koala. So nice and dark to start off with. We're beginning to shape and get that structure in place, and getting that structure and the gradient and the values all right at the base stage makes your life a lot easier when it comes to adding the hair details in. As I say, you just don't need to pack quite so many in if you get the base correct. When I first started out in pastels, I always talk about when I first started out because I think it's important to realize that I've really grown since then, and these are the techniques that I'm teaching you now, so you don't have to go through that process that I did where you made so many mistakes and just getting frustrated with works, because pastel is quite a frustrating medium to get wrong. It's messy, it really gets in your head. So hopefully these lessons will show you that there is an easier way of doing things. When I first started out, I wasn't really doing base layers. I was kind of just trying to work hair details on top of the paper straight away, and my work was lacking in depth, color, realism, everything. Basically, it looked really, really flat. So these are my golden tips to making your work look as realistic as mine does. So a little bit of information about my Patreon. There are a few different tiers. The focus tier, which is the cheapest tier, that's just sections of animals. So if you are a beginner and you're not quite confident enough to jump into the full length animal tutorials and you just want to get to grips with the medium, that tier is perfect. The one up from that is the full length animal and backlog tier. So that, as the name suggests, has full length lessons like this koala. I have a list on my website of all the tutorials that I have available for the full length tier, and there's a list at the bottom of the page with my focus lessons as well. So these middle tier lessons, they're a little bit more expensive, not too much, but they are every single month you'll get one full lesson, which can be up to 10 hours long. It's very, very in-depth. There's also a tier which if you want a critique on your work, it doesn't have to be a tutorial, anything you're working on that month, just send me one of your works and I will take a look at it and suggest how to better it and really elevate your work. So that's a bit more expensive than the middle tier, but that's very much kind of a one-to-one experience. Patreon is a subscription service, so you can cancel anytime you want. If you only want to join for 1 month, that's absolutely fine. You just have to remember to cancel before the first of the next month. So there's no contract or anything. I think a lot of people get confused or they think they're trapped, but it's absolutely not that at all. Also, if you take a look at my website and see a list of tutorials and see a couple that you like and you don't want to join the subscription, you just want to buy them as one-offs, I also provide that service. You just need to contact me on my website. There's a contact form, or just straight to my email address, which I'll pop in the description box below. So I sell those as one-offs as well. I just send all the information to your email address, the links and everything, and then you just make a one-off payment either directly to my bank, or if you are international based, so you're not in the UK, I take PayPal. The tree in this photograph is quite a tricky one. As you can see, it has lots of these spots over it. So my process is, like I do with the animals, always starting off with your darkest values first. I'm ignoring those spots for now. I'm just concentrating on building up those values in the tree, so the different brown tones. I'm also starting to work in some structure and detailing with some of those lines before I move on to the ear. So once I've got the initial base down for the tree, I can then finish off this ear on the right. You don't want to finish the ear before you've got the base down for the tree, because you'll just end up having to erase all of those lovely fuzzy hairs coming out of your ear when you're blending the tree base. So I'm just moving this out with my sponge, creating some nice tufty fur. So some nice texture within the ear here. And then onto the tree again. I've just started to work some finer details in. So with my Cretacolor, I worked some of these black lines in. I'm also working some lines in with my different brown tones. So from my Caran d'Ache, from my Faber-Castell collection as well, just a couple of these brown and medium yellow tones to start to build up all of these different values within the tree. Like I did with the fur, I'm starting to lift with my Dark Flesh 50% from Caran d'Ache 746. This tone is nice and pink, it's nice and fleshy. So we have got pink tones going on in the tree ever so subtly. So I'm using this just to start to lift. And then as always, working my Cretacolor lines in as well, just to work some extra detailing in. Then back to the ear, because I've added a little bit more detail to the tree. So I'll just be adding some of those blemishes next, so I can work plenty of these light fuzzy hairs out of the ear now, just to start to finish it off. The marks on the tree are very easy to create. I'm just using a light grey tone. This is my grey one from Stabilo 700. I'm just mark making. I'm not trying to copy every single mark exactly as it is in the photograph, because you will drive yourself crazy. And I do want to go a little bit more sparse with these marks. I don't want them quite as crazy as we can see in the photograph. That's just a little bit too much, and we don't want to draw the attention away from the koala too much. So I'm just going to work them in just roughly where I can see them the most in the photograph and where the most obvious ones sit. So you can outline them a little bit more and just pull some line details down with your darker tones as well. Getting a tiny hint of green in as well with one of my Stabilo greens, the leaf green, just because I can see some very slight hints going on in the photograph. So it's just helping with the realism here. It's also helping it to look a little bit more like, I think it's sort of a type of mold or fungus on the tree. So just making it look a little bit more natural. My favourite part, adding the whiskers in. There's not too many on this guy, unfortunately, so I'm just whisking a couple out, and then onto the bottom section of the tree. So I'll just leave you in peace to watch me finish off the koala. It's the same process as I did at the top of the tree. I'm just starting to layer up these tones, making sure I cover the paper nicely. And then I'll work on the little foot and the arm as well to finish off. And that's the koala all done. So if you do want to learn this guy in pastels, then you can just jump over to my Patreon channel. Link is underneath in the description box. There's also a huge backlog available of my tutorials, about 3 years worth. So this guy is one of many lovely lessons to learn in this medium. If you have any questions, just pop them in the comment box below and I will get back to you as soon as I can.